Infiltrate terrorists' positions. Acquire critical intelligence by any means necessary. Execute with extreme prejudice and exit without a trace. You are Sam Fisher, a highly trained secret operative of the NSA's secret arm, 3rd Echelon. Welcome to episode 32 of the 5 T's of Stealth, where we will be discussing Tom Clancy's Splinter Cell. Once again, the 5 T's include tasks, terrain, tools, threats, and tension. These are what I consider to be the fundamentals of stealth gaming. Before we get into anything, let me just say I played on normal difficulty. The game begins with a lengthy tutorial where Sam Fisher, the protagonist, must prove his worth to the NSA, or the National Security Agency, by completing a CIA training course. This tutorial might be one of the best I've experienced, and you really learn a lot. I didn't expect there to be so many different bits and pieces. I'll save all the abilities and whatnot for later, but just know this tutorial really prepares you for the rest of the game, but new gadgets are still added regularly. The story of Splinter Cell revolves all around Georgia and the country's new temporary president after the death of the previous one. The game begins with you searching for 2 missing CIA agents in Georgia. You learn that they were killed for getting too close to something, but you don't know what. Their killer is a Russian mercenary with ties to Nikolads, the new Georgian president, and you now must learn what Nikolads is hiding. It turns out that Nikolads has been secretly sending soldiers to Azerbaijan, a country that it borders, and they've been up to a whole lot of murdering. Once the news gets out, the US sends troops to assist Azerbaijan, and Nikolads goes into hiding. You then head to an oil refinery to retrieve a technician's briefcase holding a laptop with Georgian communication data. But while you're there, NATO starts bombing the rig and sending in troops, so you're basically sneaking around an active war zone. After this mission, Nikolads declares war on the United States and its allies and starts some cyber terrorism within US borders, temporarily knocking out some vital systems. The NSA realizes that Nikolads has way more intelligence than he should, and that there must be a mole or a leak inside one of the American agencies. This turns out to be the CIA, so you're off to CIA headquarters to sneak in and find the mole. The mole is an employee by the name of Mitchell Doherty, and after finding his PC, you learn that Georgian forces were at a nearby facility to gather the information, and then you kidnap him before exiting headquarters. Next on the list is heading to Kalinitek, which is the nearby facility where the Georgian forces were hiding. However, the Russian mercenaries are currently destroying all the evidence and killing the tech guys after learning they've been caught, tying up loose ends and all that. You must infiltrate the building and find the encryption key of a man named Ivan, and then defuse a bomb set to blow up the building. With the newly acquired information from the encryption, your team learns that there is some connection between Georgia and China, so you're off to the Chinese embassy to Myanmar to learn of said connection. Once inside the embassy, you hear a Chinese military general talking to Nikolads on the phone, confirming some sort of connection, but they then mention the execution of US troops, so get your ass over there and stop it. The soldiers are being kept at a slaughterhouse in Myanmar before Nikolads has their execution broadcasted, so start by knocking out the antenna for the broadcast as a distraction, and then go find the troops. With the troops is a Chinese official who desperately explains how China is not involved with Georgia. It's just a small faction of the military who follows General Fei Rong. After he explains this, Grinko, the Russian merc from earlier, sends all available men to attack the soldiers, so you have to protect them and then finally eliminate Grinko in the process. With this newly learned information of General Fei Rong, you must return to the Chinese embassy to gather evidence that he was not working in line with China's desires before all the evidence is destroyed. As you're sneaking around the embassy, you'll learn that Nikolads has abandoned Fei Rong after the failure of the execution, and he's now in his office on the brink of suicide. You must make your way to his office and force him to unlock his computer, revealing all the evidence as he dies from the poison that he drank. Now that General Fei Rong is out of the picture and diplomatic relations have returned between the United States and China, Nikolads is once more the priority. Head to the Georgian presidential palace to find him and the Ark. The Ark has been mentioned in bits and pieces throughout the game as Nikolads' big project, but it isn't until this final mission that we learn what it is. The Ark is a SATM, or a Special Atomic Demolition Munition, or just a big bomb. While sneaking through the palace, you will have to deal with men loyal to the new CIA-backed President Kristavi, who seems to be corrupt in his own special way. Kristavi has allowed Nikolaz to come back to the palace and retrieve the Ark for a large sum of money with the intention of betraying him. The Ark is locked by a retinal scanner, which is of course set to Nikolaz, so without him, that safe is not opening. Once you've infiltrated the palace, you'll find Nikolaz in the basement next to the safe, basically begging you to spare him. Similarly to how you dealt with Feirong, you'll have to capture Nikolaz and force him to open the safe. As you're opening the safe, you'll be ambushed by Kristavi's forces who hold you and Nikolaz at gunpoint. Nikolaz reveals that the Ark is already in America, and the only thing in the safe was the activation key, which you now have. The soldiers escort Nikolaz away, but start threatening you to hand over the activation key. As this is happening, Lambert, the director of the third echelon, who's been giving you orders throughout the whole game, tells you to keep your mouth shut, and that they're planning for a blackout, and you need to make the most of it. Once the blackout hits, you take out all your would-be captors, then follow in Nikolaz's footsteps towards Kristavi's office before stopping in the palace courtyard to snipe him. Once Nikolaz is dead, you simply need to escape from the palace, and the final cutscene plays, explaining how the Ark was found not far outside of DC, and under the guise of a gas leak, the building was evacuated before dealing with the bomb. We then get to watch Sam and his daughter watching the news as the president details how history will never forget the names of the strong US heroes who protected the country. And Sam just laughs and laughs, knowing damn well nobody knows his name. I really love this part with his daughter, as she was all confused, wondering why he was laughing. It really cemented my appreciation for Sam Fisher as a character. I also really like how this story is mostly presented through news reportings, which is a nice change of pace. So that's the story, but let's talk just a bit more about actual mission structure. Most of the time, you'll be infiltrating an area looking for some form of data, whether that's finding a computer with the data or collecting an encryption key. Other times, you'll simply be listening in on conversations, destroying vehicles, trailing technicians, defusing bombs, or kidnapping special targets. There will also be the occasional forced gunfight, especially on the final mission, which feels much more action-focused than the rest of the game. I found it a little funny that the last game I played, Sniper Ghost Warrior 3, had a huge focus on Georgia. Then I come over here to Splinter Cell, and I'm right back in Georgia. I don't think I've ever played a game set in Georgia before. Maybe some of the old Call of Duty games, but I don't think so. Which makes it pretty funny to me that I'm in the country for back-to-back games. The level variety present in Splinter Cell is truly next level. While the game is very linear and mostly limits your options, I didn't really care since the environments were just so compelling. You start in Georgia by infiltrating a police precinct, then you head to the Georgian Ministry of Defense. I mean, right off the bat, those are two crazy places to infiltrate. Let me just rattle off the rest of the locations for you. You will infiltrate an oil rig, CIA headquarters, Kalinitek offices, a Chinese embassy, a slaughterhouse, and finally, the Georgian Presidential Palace. What an insane list of places to go, in my opinion. And while again, you'll mostly be following the path laid out for you, I didn't mind because I was so immersed. Each level will typically have you sneaking on the rooftops, through vents, the sewers, or even just walking down the street. While mostly linear, some of these sections would provide a few different ways to travel, but it was very brief creativity. The slaughterhouse mission in particular felt very cool, with an entire section set in the meat freezer where you were forced to use thermal vision to see through all the condensation. There's another segment before that on the same mission where you have to sneak across a metal roof with giant windows and flashing lights. You have to very carefully walk along the concrete beams to avoid making sound and stay out of the light so the enemies beneath don't see you. The visual differences of each mission greatly assisted in the immersion. While in the Chinese embassy, there's a bunch of Chinese imagery and the Chinese guardian lion statues all over the place. Or, while in the palace, there's a ton of precious memorabilia locked in cases, almost like walking through a museum. There was just never a dull moment while traversing through these maps, and it's pretty hard to fully get that point across with just words. I also really appreciated how the levels don't really tell you exactly where to go, and there's at least a small amount of figuring out what to do in several areas. I do have one complaint, but it's in one specific location. On the oil rig mission, there's one spot in the very beginning that I got stuck on constantly, and you have to weirdly spam jump before that area to avoid getting caught. To be honest, it was very frustrating, and I was starting to get worried that I wouldn't be able to make it through. But luckily, that's the only time something like that occurred, at least that I can remember. Sam Fisher is a very dangerous man. He can move like no other. On that note, let's start with general movement. For starters, you actually control your speed with the mouse wheel, and from what I could tell, there are 5 different speeds, ranging from incredibly slow to a brisk jog. Also affecting your speed is, of course, crouching, which will also help you move more quietly. If you fall while crouched, you will even perform a silent landing. That's right, we once again have a sound-based game where being too loud will screw you, especially considering how you need to sneak up on enemies to either grab them or knock them out. After grabbing an enemy, you can walk around while holding them hostage, and some people can even be interrogated for some helpful information. You can also move bodies around to make sure no alarms are set off. Climbing is a big part of this game, and along with a jump, you can use ladders, climb up or across poles and pipes, use zip lines, and hang off ledges. You jump with shift, by the way, let that sink in. Climbing on the pipes could be a bit finicky whenever you were letting go to drop onto a ledge. Sometimes you would just straight up miss instead of grabbing on, but you eventually get the hang of it. Some pipes also seem to not let you on if you walk up to them or jump at them from the wrong angle, and I got stuck a time or two because I tried to use the correct exit and it didn't quite register. Also, when moving across pipes, you could even put your feet up to fit through small areas and move more quietly. Another movement option is to take cover against a wall or other object and then peek around the corners. This could be done between 2 very narrow walls, which would then allow you to sneak through the gap. If between 2 narrow-ish walls, you could even kick off a wall and do a split jump to spread your legs and stay up high. You could kick off most walls, and sometimes it was required to get a little more height and grab a ledge. Another option was something very situational, and that was when you were on certain roofs in certain locations, you could rappel on walls. I think this only occurred 2 or 3 times in very specific moments. You can open doors or slightly crack the door to peek through, and some missions will have windows for you to open as well. You can also use an optic cable to look underneath doors and get a better lay of the land before bursting through. Some doors will be locked, and to open them, you'll have to lockpick them. There are 2 items for lockpicking, your basic lockpicks or a disposable pick. The disposable pick is a single-use item that requires little to no time as you just click to unlock, while the lockpick will require you to press the different directional buttons to find which will unlock each section up to 6 times. Some doors will actually be even more secure with a keypad or a retinal scanner. If there is a retinal scanner, you'll have to grab the guy who can unlock the doors and force him to do so. And if it's a keypad, you simply need to find the code, which will then be stored in a notes section. The exception to this is the second Chinese embassy mission, where you'll actually use your thermal vision to see the heat signature of the fingers on the keypad, with said fingerprints all faded a different amount, indicating the correct order for the code. Along with your thermal vision, you will also have night vision, and I don't think I really need to describe either of these. However, I will say I love how Sam would put the goggles on by flicking his head down. In many rooms, there will be light switches you can flip, which is very important as this is yet another stealth game focused on being invisible in the shadows. Starting to sound pretty similar to Thief, huh? To tell how visible you are, there is a light meter that will fluctuate based on where you're standing. Sometimes this felt a little wonky, as it would be pitch black in an area and I'd somehow be visible, or vice versa, where it seemed bright but I was completely hidden. I think that's everything for the general side of things, so let's talk about Sam's actual arsenal. Sam's arsenal is divided into 3 categories: items, gadgets, and the SC-20K. Let's start with the items. For starters, and I'm not really sure if this should be included right here, but I think it fits, and that's random bottles and cans you can pick up and throw to cause a distraction. There are 2 different flares, a normal flare and a chemical flare, but I never actually used either of them as their purpose was creating light. I'll just stick to my night vision. Thanks. However, since I didn't bother to throw them, I'm not sure if they actually had some sort of other purpose as well. Moving on, you've got a couple different options for explosives. You've got the basic frag grenade, but also wall mines you could place in the path of an enemy for some satisfying big brain behavior. Lastly, there's medkits, which naturally will heal you. I'm not sure exactly how much it would heal for, but it was not a lot. I'm guessing maybe a fourth or fifth of your total HP. Next up, let's talk gadgets. For starters, you get a silenced pistol. Shooting with this thing feels horrible. Although, it's pretty cool when you take cover and peek around an edge and then pull out your pistol for an enjoyable kill. You can also use your pistol to shoot out lights and cameras, assuming neither of them have some sort of protective casing. Naturally, you can also shoot mines, which is helpful if you place one down for a scheme and it's just barely out of range when an enemy walks by. We talked about them earlier, but this is where you have your lockpicks, disposable picks, and optic cable. I mentioned earlier that in some missions your objective will be to listen in on conversations, and to do that you'll need the laser mic. This allows you to listen in from afar if aimed correctly. And lastly, there's the camera jammer. This looks a bit like a pistol, and you'll just point it at a camera, then activate it to temporarily jam it. This device has a limited battery, and the camera is only jammed when it's active. I found this pretty useless most of the time, since you can sneak past cameras pretty easily if you stick close to the walls. Our last category is the SC-20K, which is actually a silenced semi-automatic rifle. This rifle has a sniper scope, and you can hold your breath to steady the scope. The additional options are just different types of ammunition that can be fired from its grenade launcher attachment. Let's go through them one by one. The sticky shooter. This is basically a taser. Ring airfoil rounds. These are high impact, zero penetration bullets that silently knock out an enemy. The sticky camera. A reusable camera that you can shoot to scout an area. Smoke grenades. This is not what you would expect from a smoke grenade, because it actually falls more in line with what I would expect to be called a gas grenade in modern games. This will incapacitate enemies depending on how much smoke they inhale, as sometimes they would just cough for a bit then recover. Lining this up was a grind as well, since it bounced around like crazy. Lastly, and probably my favorite gadget in the game, distraction cameras. Imagine the normal sticky camera, but while looking through, you can also whistle to lure enemies, and then release gas just like the smoke grenade to knock out several enemies at once. I loved spamming whistle on this like an idiot, but I can't tell you how many times I misclicked and just wasted the camera. What I really appreciate about this set of tools is that while this is certainly a violent stealth game, a lot of the options you have are more for utility than actual violence. The aiming is so bad in this game to the point that you can't just start blasting guys most of the time, since they'll just obliterate you while you're trying to line up the shot. The bloom is so bad, and the only time I felt accurate is when I used the scope on the rifle and held my breath. Otherwise, you might as well be shooting with your eyes closed. Overall, Sam's got some crazy movement tech, and I look forward to seeing how that evolves in the franchise. Your basic enemy present in Splinter Cell is your soldiers or mercenaries. There's several different reskins, but they all seem to function the same. I should also mention civilians, who will see you then start running and screaming. Detection in this game is pretty wild, and at times, pretty annoying. I don't love sound-based stealth when it forces you to walk at a snail's pace, which I think I mentioned when I discussed the Thief series. I'm all for being quiet, but at times with these classic games, it's just so overbearing that it borders on frustrating and boring. In the final mission, you'll come across some elite Georgian soldiers who still act the same, but they've got some advanced armor and headshots are off the table. If you alert one guard for even a second, I swear that any nearby guards were likely to just start wandering over, even if they were pretty far away. Any sort of alert, and it was like these guys knew their homies were down, and that was a little crazy. This occurred even if it was for a split second while walking up to knock a guy out. Something I really appreciated is when the soldiers found an ally unconscious, they would actually go and wake them up. I love that, I really do. On one hand, it really incentivizes hiding the damage you do, but on the other hand, it was hilarious to let them help each other up, then knock them both out right away. Seriously, some of these soldiers would be woken up and struggling to get back on their feet just for me to walk over and knock them right back out. Great little system, truly. Aside from our human adversaries, There are also dogs in some of the later levels. I was trying to test them a bit to see what they could truly do, and it seems they can notice you from further away by smell. I'm not exactly sure how this triggers, but you definitely have to be more careful around the dogs. I mentioned the different locked door variations earlier, but I just briefly wanted to mention them again here. Locked doors that require any sort of effort beyond a lockpick immediately add some extra difficulty, even if that's just looking around for a code. I mentioned using thermal vision earlier to see the fingerprints left on keypads, but what I did not tell you is how many times I failed a mission because I would kill the guy who had the code before he could put it in. Afterwards, I would get a voiceover from Lambert saying something like, "You have no idea how big of a screw up that was, Fisher," and having to load a previous save. There were also some missions where you didn't actually get the code, and instead you would have to slip in behind the guy who unlocked the door before it shut again. This made for several close calls and retries. We've got to talk about cameras again as well. Cameras are pretty basic in this game and don't have the best detection. I found it pretty easy to sneak past them most of the time. Where the complexity comes into play is with two different types of cameras. Well, maybe saying types is a bit extreme, but some cameras have protection and can't be destroyed, so you have to sneak past them. Towards the end of the game, there are two more additions to the roster: searchlights and sentry turrets. Searchlights actually took me a minute to get used to, as there's no one moving them, and if you're spotted, they'll set off an alarm. Sentry turrets are about what you would expect. They scan over a limited area, looking back and forth, waiting to spray at anyone they spot. The difference here is that each sentry has a little laptop with it, and by using this laptop, you can deactivate them. I believe this only occurred once, but there were mines placed in one area. Not wall mines, which were present in many levels and could actually be diffused and then reused, but land mines actually hidden in the ground. To see these landmines, you had to use your thermal vision and slowly walk around them while also dodging the searchlights. They really got their point across by having an enemy walk into a mine as soon as you entered the area, and I loved watching that corpse launch. I'm going to very loosely call this a boss fight, but your encounter with General Fei Rong is kinda sorta like a boss fight. Okay, not really, but still, it's a hilarious encounter. This dude is drunk out of his mind, bitching about how Nikolai's betrayed him and that Chinese special forces were going to kill him, and he wants a soldier's death. I decided to just hang out with him for a bit, and he's just chugging alcohol while spraying randomly around the room trying to hit you. This moment was definitely a highlight of the game for me. This dude is asking for you to kill him before the poison he decided to take kills him, and then you just walk up, grab him, force him to unlock his computer, and let the poison do its work. A truly great interaction, no notes. Splinter Cell was honestly a pretty damn hard game. Although I will say, whenever a game makes you walk slowly to avoid noise, it can really add to the difficulty because you have to be so careful. There were so many times when somebody would randomly hear me take a step or two, and now the whole situation is more stressful. Sound isn't the only reason this game is hard. As I mentioned earlier, in one mission, there is a searchlight landmine combination. This section was so insanely tense. You not only had to keep your thermal on to spot the mines, but you also had to be aware of the searchlights scanning the area and the enemy soldiers looking from above. Another moment I mentioned earlier was sneaking across the slaughterhouse roof, which is actually right after the landmine section, and this was another moment where you had to be so insanely careful, although I guess that does venture back into the realm of sound. I talked about how terrible the aiming mechanics in this game are, and in a way, I appreciate that. I know that sounds weird, but bear with me. If the shooting mechanics were better, then any sort of alert with the guards would have been a cakewalk. Truthfully, I think I would have just gone blasting on every mission with no worry of the consequences. But because the aiming was just so horrible, it incentivized being extra careful, which is hilarious to me. I don't know if that was the intention. I imagine it wasn't, but either way, I can actually appreciate it to a certain degree. However, in the forced shootout segments, this made me want to scream. So I guess take the good with the bad. Another aspect of the tension actually falls back onto the traversal and movement mechanics. There was one specific moment in the second Chinese embassy mission where you're moving across a pipe, but have to suddenly stop and hide behind these flags while the enemies are walking through. Then, one of the soldiers actually stops right by the end of the pipe, and you have to then put your feet up to move extra slowly and quietly to be able to drop right behind him. I know I said sound wasn't the only reason this game was difficult, but I guess I more accurately should have said sound isn't always the primary reason this game is difficult, but it's almost always part of the supporting cast, if you will. I can't quite find the words for it, but I just love how Splinter Cell makes you this absolute badass, but still really limits your capabilities. It honestly feels at least a bit like Styx in that regard, and if I'm ever comparing you to Styx, just know that's a massive win. Every enemy in this game is more than capable of putting you down, and that's something I will always appreciate. There were also several missions that would impose restrictions on you, and naturally, any sort of restriction will make the game more difficult. This would be things along the lines of no killing or no alarms, which is what you would expect to see. All in all, I was thoroughly impressed by Tom Clancy's Splinter Cell, and I'm almost surprised to say that the immersion felt throughout the game is one of, if not, the strongest aspects of this game. I really felt like Sam Fisher, sneaking around like a man with the world on his shoulders. I was really excited to try this franchise, as Splinter Cell is considered one of the greats and one of the classics, but I was nervous, especially after all the issues I had with the classic Thief trilogy. I am so happy to say this game not only blew my expectations out of the water, but it's also made me incredibly eager to continue on with the series, and I cannot wait to see how it evolves.